Good afternoon, everyone. Can everybody hear us? Yep, thank you. So we were just dealing with a little bit of technical issues, but we will start. Thank you for joining us into the CERN APAC Textile Stream Continual Conference Series. We welcome you all, and I would like to start this meeting with an acknowledgement of country. So we acknowledge the people of the Wui Wurrung and Bun Wurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin nations on whose unceded land we conduct the business of the CERN APAC, and also we are speaking from. I would like to convey my gratitude and respect for the elders past and present and emerging. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you all. So we are gathered here to celebrate the congregation of all the textile researchers and people who are working in the textile circular economy aspects to deep dive into the circular transition that Australia needs at the moment in terms of its lot of other issues that we are going to be discussing. So we have with us three rock stars in their own discipline: Meriel, Nazmul, and I think Timo is going to join us soon. So we are going to be talking to them about some of the issues that currently are existing and going forward needs some solutions from different lenses. And we all know that Timo is here. Alston, would you mind looking at that, why it is not working for him? Oh, yes.
I can speak now.
Oh,
amazing.
Great. Oh, thank you. So I would like to invite Meriel first. We want to hear it from your opinion in terms of what you do in your research and how things are going currently in Australia's transition to circular economy. Thanks, Meriel. Take it away.
Thanks, Saniyat, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this. My name's Meriel Chamberlin. I'm a textile scientist. I'm not an employed academic. But as we prepped for this, I sort of managed to straddle between the two a bit because I guess I take quite an academic approach. And I've been working in the industry 25 years, and I've worked in and around manufacturing and supply chain, and I've had the privilege to work at every stage. So from working with farmers growing fibre all the way to being part of a buying team at a major brand, and then a smaller brand too, and that's been in both Europe and here in Australia. And then last year I had the privilege of doing a Winston Churchill Trust fellowship to go and look at zero waste textiles, because after spending some time having set up Full Circle Fibres nearly 10 years ago, it was really clear to me that we spend a lot of time talking about things we need to invent to go circular, when actually an awful lot of things already exist and we're choosing not to use them. And I was wondering why. So I wanted to go and see in countries where their cost and regulatory landscape is similar to us, well, what's working now and how could we learn from that to make things make sense in Australia? And most of what's currently working for circularity is actually circularity that's not stopped working for over 200 years. It's just we've kind of ignored it or pushed it to the side because it's mostly with natural fibres, and predominantly it's higher value with wool, which is only now 1% of our fibre use. It also requires a sorting, and because it's not a solution for everything, we seem to not be able to walk and chew gum in this space, and if it can't solve everything, we say it's not a solution, which is interesting. So I'd just like to say on that, then we talk about circular economy, but there's no remanufacturing without manufacturing. So I also just was looking at that and where people are doing best practice that can be part of or nudge to circularity. And so that was what I came back essentially energized and inspired. Here in Australia, we still can do every part of the textile industry by one stage, that is spinning yarn, fibre into yarn. And for us to activate mechanical recycling, that sits very much in there. So we actually still weave, we can still knit, we can still dye, we can still print, and obviously we grow fibre, which is unusual to the rest of the world. But the other thing I really wanted to look at were the features of a successful business. It's not just machines in buildings, what's going on in the ecosystem. And so very quickly, they're family or family-like businesses. They've often been around decades, possibly even centuries, and they are nudging, using their knowledge to value circularity. Maybe they never stopped. They focus on excellence, and they focus on their bit of their market value as opposed to market share. They're not worried about being 10% of the global market. They're worried about their viable business. So I think we need to reignite the idea of the going concern. They aren't so terribly worried about patents, and they're more bothered about trade secrets and knowledge, because that's actually where the power is. And particularly as our rules-based order is struggling, who are you going to sue anyway, right? You're going to need to have the knowledge of how to do it and beat everybody else to it and be excellent. They really keep their people and their family-like in their mindset. There's no VC or like the crazy hype cycle of invest, extract, none of that, the polar opposite. And finally, most of them own their own buildings. And so I've just summarized that there quickly, because we're going to talk about all sorts of other things in this session. But unless we've got the anatomy and understanding of what it takes for somebody to be physically processing, whether they're making or remaking in whatever sector, those are the ingredients of a viable business, which is really different from the founder hype cycle. And that will probably come across some of the conversation about overproduction and right size. So I'll leave that there, but essentially, yes, we can, and there's no reason for us not to be getting on with it now in Australia.
Thank you, Meriel, for starting this in such a high note. I feel the energy already. I'll go to Timo now. Timo, can you please tell us about your research?
Thanks so much. Can you hear me okay? That's great. That was a little bit nerve-wracking getting into the call. Hi everyone. If we haven't met, I am Associate Professor Timo Rissanen at UTS in Sydney, and I've been a researcher in the fashion and sustainability space for just over 2 decades now, and it started originally with a focus on pre-consumer fabric waste, and how fashion design can address that, and from there then sort of started to, from that sort of focus on individual garments, a lot of my work more recently has been looking at aspects of the whole system. I will say that the focus on garments is absolutely critical, and I commend all the people that worked on the circular design guide that just was published, the refashioning guide. I know some of the authors are on this call. Really important and really critical work, but we absolutely also need to keep a view on the whole system and the total volumes that are being produced and consumed, but also the volumes that are not being consumed. We are overproducing, as many of you know. And just to sort of bring it back to Australia, some of you would have seen the Seamless update last year that said that we're now, or in 2023, we're buying 53 garments per person per year in Australia, which already is really hair-raising to me. But it's important to remember that on top of that, there's also a whole bunch of garments that are produced that are never actually sold or bought by anyone. They are landfilled or incinerated brand new. And so on the whole, as a result of this pursuit of never-ending growth and I would say also greed, we are in this point in time where we're overproducing on a almost unimaginable scale, and contributing to multiple planetary crises, including climate change and also the plastification of soils and waterways and the atmosphere. And I do see ways forward, but I do think that one of the things that we really need to transform is the overall mindset about this. And also that's just the focus. Like I said, I do think that at all times, even when we are focusing on just parts of the system, even when we are focusing on just the design of individual garments, all of which is really critical and important work, we also always have to keep an eye on the whole system and the scale of the whole system, and making sure that that system, which is this industry of ours, fashion and textiles, that it is in line with what this planet can actually sustain and support without negatively impacting our ability to, and future generations' ability to actually sustain ourselves and live flourishing lives on this planet. And I might leave it there. I had pulled out a whole lot of different quotes from studies, but I'll leave it for now. We can maybe return to some of these things. So thanks.
Sorry, I was talking to the mute button. Nazmul, can you tell us about your research, please?
Thanks, Saniyat, and thanks for inviting me. I hope everyone is listening to me.
Yes.
Thanks for the confirmation. Well, this is Dr. Nazmul Islam. I am currently working as a quantitative sustainability scientist in CSIRO. And my research interest is about low carbon food and fiber system. Before joining CSIRO, I was working with Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. And in my capacity, I have contributed towards low carbon development in developing countries like Bangladesh by contributing to national communications, as well as also forest reference emission level system. And after joining CSIRO, I have kind of contributed towards a greenhouse gas baseline study of the Australian cotton sector, and now also working for the mitigation assessment. And while doing these research, what I'm seeing, there are lots of advancement and then also progress towards mitigating in terms of agriculture, for example, use of nitrification inhibitor, as well as also green ammonia. But at the same time, what I'm saying, there exists also lots of data gap in relation to the use phase, as well as also consumer behavior. So I'm really looking forward in these sessions to hear from all of you about your experience in relation to the consumer use phase. Thank you.
Thank you, Nazmul. That was quite succinct. Now I will go back to Timo on our first sort of inquiry into, because you have sort of mentioned about the overproduction and the nature of how big the consumption market is. So can you tell us a little bit about what drives this overproduction, and like how can this be mitigated? If we think from the academic perspective, we sort of talk about this a lot, but I would like to sort of hear about your insight into the drivers and also how this could be resolved in the long run. Thank you.
Thanks. And it's I will say that it is one of the complex questions for our time, and I don't claim to have all of the answers, and I think it is it's a continuous collective search for answers, because also solutions that work in one context might not work in another, and so forth. But in terms of what drives it, I think there's a few things. I think the sort of the overall economic mindset that we're in still values the pursuit of growth in a very uncritical way, like all growth is good. And it's even, in the kind of like how we receive economic information, it's often just in systems of like, economic growth at the moment is 1.2%, and that's good or bad compared to last year, and so forth. But the what's behind it is kind of very rarely communicated to us. Bringing it back to the fashion context, fashion and textile context, partly what drives, I think, overproduction is the almost complete absence of regulation when it comes to volume, and it's easy for me to say this. I think it's a much more complex and difficult conversation that we should engage in both locally and globally, because one of the things that, fossil carbon has made possible over the last century and a bit is this illusion that in terms of the kind of material production, the volume of material production, that there are no limits. And that's sort of evident in the sort of explosion of polyester over the last 5 decades or so, but particularly over the last 25 years. And it's been a very rapid growth, especially when you compare that rate of growth to what we call natural fibers, all of which have land-based limits. There are concrete limits to how much wool we can produce in the world, how much cotton we can produce in the world, and so forth. Whereas with fossil carbon-based materials, there is this illusion that there are very few limits. And so I think when we start to accept, if we start to accept that there are actual limits, and we should, engage in the difficult work of figuring out what those boundaries might be, then there's another conversation that will follow about, the sort of volumes that can be produced and how they are distributed in a fair, equitable way. And to me, those are some of the most difficult conversations of the next decade or two. But they're absolutely critical if we are to take fashion's role in mitigating climate change, for example, seriously. I do think that those conversations are ahead for us. I think just getting out of getting the blinkers of and actually starting to acknowledge that there are boundaries, there are limits to the volumes of material production, I think is a start. But that's often some of the hardest. The mindset shift around that is some of the hardest work that we have to do. Once we get there, I think some of the work will become not necessarily easier, but it does take some of the barriers out.
That's fascinating. Thanks, Timo. Now, following up from the overproduction question, I want to jump and pick Meriel's brain in terms of, yes, we will be required to put in those limits around how much we can consume. But then again comes the other barrier that we sort of don't talk about within the context of Western societies is the capacity to build our own sort of manufacturing capability. And I would like to, because you have been working on this for however many years,
Yeah.
Can you tell us about what would it take for Australia to develop its manufacturing capacity to that transition that we keep on talking about?
Yeah. Okay. So yes, I've been working on this for some time. Some of you on this call may have heard me speak about it before. Really, I'd say, and it's not dissimilar from what Timo said, the biggest thing we need is a mindset change. It is unfathomable in this enormously wealthy country that we keep telling ourselves we can't do things. It's unbelievable. When we decide we want to be gold medal winning at stuff, we go and do it. When we decide we want, as a country of a tiny population, we want to be the best in the world at something, we go and do it. And we pour billions into it, billions, into stadiums particularly. And so really it's a question of deciding what we want to be excellent at and then looking at our natural advantages. And the sport analogy is great. We have an amazing swimming capability for our population because we have the ability to have lots of outdoor pools. Well, we have got natural fibre and space and sun and wind here. So the reason for us not to do some things for ourselves is frankly inexcusable. We've just put it in the too hard basket. The other thing I'd say is we have a habit of being, we think we don't do any manufacturing here. And we do. We actually do loads and loads of manufacturing. And I don't just mean textiles. Our textile manufacturing is patchy, to say the least. And the handful that are still left are definitely survivors. They're definitely innovative. They are across markets. That was one of the other things. No mill in textiles it's very rare for them to be just in fashion. They're usually in something functional, maybe interiors, maybe industrial, which gives you a lot more common uptake because fashion is so ephemeral. Fashion alone is never going to drive local manufacturing, period. Right? So we have to look at the whole sector, not the market segment, if we're going to tackle this industry. But with that, I would say, and actually, if some of you have looked at the CSIRO report, I think it was last year, with the big stocks and flows of circularity nationally, one of the massive problems we have in this country is everything we do that isn't resources on a big scale report is eclipsed by the volumes in resources. So everything else looks like a rounding error. Like the textile and clothing sector of everything we import is barely visible, and that's part of a little line that includes all our electronics and everything else. So, and yet we're still dumping those hundreds of thousands of tons. So I think we need to be able to read the data better and see the value in tackling things, even if it doesn't tackle everything. And rather than people going, well, we've got to deal with tailings dams, so we won't deal with textiles. I mean, what an absurd situation to be in. We can surely do both. And then with that, whether it's manufacturing in a linear to be biological circular way, or manufacturing with one of the processes to being part processing onshore, like some of the ones that are here now with Blocktex, what might come on stream with Samsara Eco. We've got ThreadUp of setup over in Western Australia, Worn Up in Sydney, then we've got apparel, and we've got a lot of the downcycling and everything going on. And some of them are planning to be able to take hundreds and thousands of tons, which is a lot. It's not nothing. But when you look at it on that big picture, it looks like a flea on an elephant, and people go, why bother? And we really have to get out of that mindset, because that's where these things start from. And the question needs to be, is there a viable value creation business to be had that is sustainable in its own right? It's no different from saying, we know we want the gorgeous designer boutique as well as the big store in a Westfield, right? And the same mindset needs to be there to value all the scales, as long as they themselves are economically and materially sustainable. We absolutely definitely need the regulation change. We're currently at massive risk of dumping because of tariffs for the US. So there is going to be floodgates open. And are our regulators ready? Others can have a comment on that. But as far as our ability to have some full circularity onshore, there is no reason why not to. Are we going to do everything onshore? No. Could we have some really strategic partnerships with some regional neighbours to have some circularity that's bits of onshore and bits of offshore? Absolutely. Especially if you think of a lot of the partnerships we've got with Vietnam, with Indonesia, with India, Fiji, and more. I know getting things part processed in and out of China can be a bit trickier, but a lot of the recycling that's going on is not just in China. So, there's no reason to not be that. And we also have an amazing research capability here that we should build on, like at RMIT, like at DQ, like at CSIRO. So we kind of do ourselves a disservice for assuming we can't do things, but we really struggle to have the guts to take things next level, which is, again, kind of weird. And I do just want to pop this other myth, because everybody says it's about labour. And in garment making, yes, labour is a massive factor, and people have tried to automate it but struggled. But in every other stage, in spinning and all the rest of it, you can almost have dark factories, they're so automated. So actually it's real estate and insurance and power, which is entirely in our gift to decide how we regulate and distribute and support different resources. So if even a fraction of the billions that had gone into carbon capture and storage that still doesn't work, had gone into known technology for circularity now, we could be up and running. We could be processing tens of thousands of tons. So really, and maybe this is interesting from an academic point of view, one of the challenges we have when we decide to support local manufacturing is we have a habit of setting up banks, but they're not a strategy. We don't decide what capability do we want in 10 years' time to ensure that we actually put the jigsaw together and fill in the gaps, rather than having 8 corner pieces instead of 4, which is just of the projects people feel like doing that might be eligible for the funding, and being really, it's a bit like what's happened with renewables. It's sort of coming, but it could have been so much more efficient if we'd only faced the fact that we needed a strategy. So we're kind of trying to say we want to get there, but refusing to navigate and set a chart. And we do need to do that too, but by looking at what we could do for ourselves, what could be profitable to do for ourselves. And And with that, stocks and flows look at the textiles we need. So I'm probably running out of my time, but there's definitely benefits to being able to do some things here, because that's how you learn and innovate, because a lot of the innovation comes from design plus the manufacture together, and the research plus the manufacture together, and that's the sweet spot of really cool ideas that really can scale. And I think we just need to be pragmatic and back ourselves, really, and not be scared, not being scared of maybe leading the world on some things. Why not?
Thank you, Meriel. Meriel talked about the sweet spot in terms of industry and researchers, academia, everything coming together. Now, I will talk about and ask about that to Nazmul. Like, LCA has been seen as the know-it-all and be-it-all in terms of analyzing the environmental impact of like a lot of different materials. Can you give us a bit of an insight into how the LCA data can be interpreted in the life cycle of a garment, and which one is the most worrying bit when we sort of talk about the implications of design versus manufacture versus use phase versus the end of life? Can you give us a bit more details from your experience, Nazmul?
Thanks a lot, Saniyat, for this great question. I'd like to answer these in two phases. First, about the environmental impact in different stages, and then how LCA can be incorporated for more sustainable fashion items. At first, if you see the environmental impacts, basically, as we all know, the environmental impacts of different fiber can vary. And synthetic fibers generally have the higher impact, due to their production processes as well as the microplastic pollution, right? And now if you see the natural fibers like cotton and wool also have environmental impacts based on their water use requirement as well as also large land use. So the impact can vary. And now if we come to the different stages, and if we see the environmental impact coming from cotton, definitely starting from the agricultural phase, and then the environmental impact can vary depending on the water use and then toxicity coming from the pesticide, and then also eutrophication and greenhouse gas emission coming from the fertilizer phase. So after this agricultural phase, now if we move to the processing phase or the manufacturing phase, it depends on the energy infrastructure as well as the manufacturing technologies used in this manufacturing process. For example, if there is a recycled water use or renewable energy integrated into the system, there will be less impact. And now if we come to the use phase, again, the impacts can vary depending on the consumer habits or the behavior, buying behavior, and then also washing, drying, and ironing behavior. So in short, the impact can vary, and impact can depends also on the technology use. So now the question is how LCA can support the sustainable fashion items. As I mentioned, the impact can vary depending on the different stages. So it will be good to have a good system boundary to see the environmental impacts throughout the system, and then also considering all the fibers. For example, whenever you are comparing the natural fiber like cotton with the synthetic fiber, we need to consider starting from the mining phase, because most of the synthetic fiber coming from the mining phase. If we consider only the manufacturing phase compared with the cotton, considering the agricultural phase, we may see that the impact is reduced for the synthetic fiber. So it's the question of system boundary. And then also it depends on the data, availability of data. Most of the time you will see that in the lifecycle assessment databases, the data is not so updated based on the recent technologies. So my interpretation is that it will be good to represent the LCA databases as well as update the LCA databases considering the industry practices. Most often you will see that the industry, there is some kind of trust issues. The industry is not sharing their proprietary data. And that's why you will see that most of the time in the academic LCA, we need to do lots of assumptions because of the lack of specific information in relation to the production processes. So I think for the application of the LCA, to ensure a sustainable fashion items, it needs to build trust among the researcher, academia, and also with the industry practitioners to have a transparent system through which we can analyze the overall sustainability of the fashion industry.
Thanks, Nazmul. That's quite interesting what you just talked about, because it's like that system boundary that you talked about, I think is one of the most important thing when we keep talking about like the interpretation of the data when it comes to like the product life cycle. Now, I'm just going to like reflect on as I was listening to all of you and looking at like the current circular economy definitions. We sort of talk about the material efficiency and nobody sort of talks about the sufficiency. I would actually like to pick all of your brain in terms of what does that mean? Like if we want to, in an ideal world, we would, considering the sustainability, planetary boundaries that we talked about, what would that mean? I would start with Meriel now.
Just unmuting. Thanks, Saniyat. And I think one of the things that's really challenging in a space like textiles and clothing is the fact that we don't use it just once. Now, that's not a problem. We're really glad we don't use it just once. Using clothes just once is a big problem, but it is a really big challenge for how we measure system impact. So the work that Nazmul's doing on LCA is incredible. But at the end of the day, if the work he's doing applies to the LCA of a steak, you can only eat that steak once. Whereas the LCA on the t-shirt I'm wearing, which I happen to pick up in an op shop, it's the impact per wear. And so this is one of the most massive challenges when people love to go after, there were so many liters of water in this or this, and it's like, well, whatever those inputs were, the real question is, can we do justice to them so that if we've made that really precious, beautiful wool jacket, do we keep it for the next 10 years and really look after it? And then we've slowed the system down. And so then it's a question of, have we designed something with those ingredients, whatever they are, that are worthy of those impacts? That means for the times that we do extract from the ground, extract from agriculture, the speed at which we're using it is slow enough that we have more than had time to put back, right? Which then comes down to the thing being so lovely, you don't want to damage it, you want to repair it. And I always use the idea of jeans for this. So I think the challenge with sufficiency is that it is really, really hard to put a value on good design because it's so personal. You could have a pair of jeans that have essentially got, you know, the fiber's been handpicked by angels, everything's traceable, there's all the rest of it. And there's another pair of jeans that, you know, but they're the ones my bum looks good in. And they're the ones that I'm going to nurture for 10 years and never wash with the zip undone and all of that stuff, never put in a tumble dryer, never leaving the Queensland sun because, oh my God, I found some jeans that fit my bum. And so that, you know, the other jeans, I really want to support that label, but I don't really like them on me. They've gone to the op shop after 5 wears. Okay, maybe somebody else, they look perfect on, fantastic. But this business of sufficiency, particularly in clothing that's discretionary, i.e. fashion, as opposed to uniform or industrial use or health or all the rest of it, all of the science around impact kind of hits a bowl of jelly, you know, of what does it mean there? So the question is, can we have some transparency over the data so that we can at least acknowledge and do justice to the impacts, whatever they were, and that everything was fair and safe as it could be? Over to the academics to figure out how to measure all that.
Yes, thanks, Meriel. Timo, the sufficiency.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Meriel. That was really great sort of intro into the topic, because it just reminded me that you know, clothing consumption, it's not rational oftentimes. One designer said to me in a conversation a few months ago that, you know, it's important to remember that the reasons we buy clothing is very different to the reasons we buy washing powder, for example. Like there's a different way of thinking, and you know, clothing, our relationship to clothing is deeply emotional as well, and that's not a bad thing. But I think we sometimes forget that when we talk about sufficiency, and so. Like, I'm sure most people on the call would have seen the report in 2022 from the Hot Oil Cool Institute, the Unfit, Unfair, Unfashionable report that looked at clothing consumption from the perspective of planetary boundaries, but also fairness and equity and so forth. And you know, for people in wealthy developed economies like Australia, the recommendation is somewhere between 5 to 7 new garments per person per year, you know, talking about sufficiency against an existing wardrobe of maybe 75 pieces. And I do think it's really great that we have that, but then I think it's really important to remember that will mean a very different thing to every single one of us. Our lifestyles are different. Our how we express ourselves through clothing is different from one person to the next, and so that side of clothing has to be in these conversations as well. Like we can't reduce this to some kind of rational you know, set of metrics that I mean we could, and it becomes a very fascist project very quickly, I in my view. But yeah, I think the topic of sufficiency is really important, because coming back to the 53 garments per person per year in Australia, like I am curious about like what does enough mean for someone that buys 53 garments, because I buy a lot less, so there must be someone that buys a lot more. But I think that question of enough, like we can apply it in a wealthy place like this in so many different, like how many cars is enough for a family, how many boats is enough for a family, how many bedrooms in a house is enough, how many square meters in a house is enough. Like there's all these, I mean, it's not just with clothing, but like the question of sufficiency, I think, is particularly critical in a place like Australia, and it's in some ways a difficult one as well to have. But that shouldn't stop us from talking about it and having shared conversations, asking shared questions about sufficiency.
Thanks, Timo. Nazmul, you wanted to have an interpretation from the LCA perspective on sufficiency?
Exactly. I'm just trying to interpret from my LCA perspective or quantitative sustainability perspective. Well, in our world, I will say environmental impact is a product of population, affluence, and then technology. And if I see population and affluence is creating demand, and technology is basically related with the production. And now if we see the efficiency is basically referring to the using more resources effectively, and this is basically related with the technology. But if we see sufficiency is basically referring to the demand management, which is basically in relation to the population and as affluence, by managing the consumption and then also extending the product lifespan. I think Meriel already talked about the product lifespan and how to explore those alternative options. So to me, it will be really not a good idea to only focus on efficiency. We need to also think about sufficiency, and to do that, it's basically the demand management. And in these aspect, I think consumer, that is, if I say our society or the consumer, is really important.
Thank you so much for all of your insights into the transition to circularity for Australia and some challenges. I would like to now basically jump into the QA, and we have got a couple of questions already. And like if people are happy, I'm just going to jump into that. So there is a question on, it's a very interesting one and quite apt as well. So France recently, like in the lower Senate, passed that like tax on the garments and like, trying to battle the ultra fast fashion like Shein and Timo. But we have seen recently the rise of Shein and Timo subscription in Australia. Do you want to have a comment on that, Meriel? I'll point that to you.
Yeah, I'll give it a go. I have a daughter who's now just got into her own buying power, so I'm witness to that part of the world that's really different from me. I think one of the things that's really hard, I think we have to be aware that I feel like we gaslight the consumer. On the one hand, in these kind of forums, we go, oh my God, the consumer. And then it's like asking somebody who's trying to lose weight to stand in the middle of a lolly shop. Like, it's just not fair, right? And then I just think we respect that. I also think some of that 53, before we get to Shein and Timo, what about all the merch? All those fun runs. I think the breast cancer fun run in Brisbane's like a 25,000 t-shirt event. Yeah, that's much bigger than a single product run for most brands in this country. Way more, maybe tenfold more than some, right? Or more. So I really think we also need, every time there is a sports team, you've got to buy another kit, all the rest of it, and that's nearly all polyester. So a lot in our culture forces us to buy clothes that isn't fashion, but it just accrues. And if you've got kids in sport or family in sport particularly, you see it all the time. So it's just, I think that's part of the 53. I don't know. Back to Shein and Timo. They service plus size in a way a lot of others don't. Is it really any different from some of the other fast fashion brands other than they've short-circuited the profit centers that are in the West? Does that mean we should be okay with it? No. But I think we've got to be honest that essentially, in some ways, the countries that we've used to make the clothes that we have bought for years and years and years have now just applied all the skills that we've asked them to develop and gone, all right, well, here you go. Now it's on our terms. But I think that means that we can't pretend that if we seriously want to deal with this, regulation will be essential. And if you look at all the work that went into the preparation of Seamless, you look into all the work, if you ask anybody anywhere overseas, including when I talk to people about this on my fellowship, everybody says it will not change unless there's regulation and it's all in. And that will mean whoever owns it at the border, there's a fee on that bag, whatever its value. No, just like there's no GST on less than $1,000. It can be done. We've just got to decide to do it. I can appreciate politically that's awkward, but every single brand designer, retailer in the consultation for Seamless said it will need to be mandatory if this is going to be what it needs to be. And so it's a matter of time. But if we've got those mechanisms in place, that means we've already got the mechanisms to be in position for, these dumping that's going to happen as the world shocks with tariffs and all the rest of it as well. At the moment, we would already have some tools and levers we could pull if we had that infrastructure in place. But it could be done. We just need to not overcomplicate it.
Thanks, Meriel. I have another question. I think it's for Timo. It's about the overproduction issue. Now, in terms of like this buying behavior on consumers, there is a lot on like TikTok, like influencer based, almost like buying. What do you think we are doing wrong in there in terms of like, educating the consumers on the impact of overproduction?
It's a great question, and in some ways, if I think about it a lot in my work, I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer it, but I have felt for some time, some years, that the kind, I mean, this is going back at least 10 years, that I've seen the kind of haul videos on YouTube. Back then it was on YouTube, and now it's on TikTok. You know, where people show these purchases of 10 pieces, 20 pieces, like the unboxing or haul videos, and like, just like we put photos on cigarette packets in Australia, I do think that those videos should come with some kind of education about the impacts of that kind of behavior. And I mean, you know, if it was up to me, they would be banned, those videos. But I get that a lot of things aren't up to me, because I do think that they kind of contribute to what Meriel put it so brilliantly, like that you know, it is that thing of being in a candy store when you're trying to lose weight. Like, buying is so easy now as well. Like, like, even compared to 10 years ago, it's a couple of clicks and it's already on its way to you. And I'm not saying that you know, convenience is necessarily a bad thing, but combined with really low prices, where you can literally get like a piece of clothing for less now than a coffee costs sometimes. For me, being of a certain generation, that is still unfathomable. I get that for the younger generation, that's probably just the norm now. But knowing what goes into a garment, what goes into producing the fiber, what goes into making fabric, and what goes into making a garment, for me, the two shouldn't be on par. And so, yeah, coming back to this very rambly answer to a simple question, but I do think that there should be some control over, or some something of the other side, something of the impacts when we have haul videos of the influencer videos. I do think that there should be something to counter the let's consume.
Yeah, Timo, I'm just going to ask you a supplementary thing from yes, if the rules were in our hands, we would definitely put a lot of stringent stuff there. Now, I think Meriel just touched on it as well. Like, just simply, how important is seamless being mandatory for Australia?
I think it should be mandatory.
Yeah. Yes, Meriel.
But
I think. Sorry, Timo.
No, go.
But I think we need to be clear that really it's just the business of stuff, right? Anybody making a profit from selling a thing that has no path but landfill, there needs to be some sort. We just have, we have to just realize that that's actually theft of our planet. Like, if you're not responsible for the aftermath of what you've profited from, then that's planetary theft. Sounds really radical to say it like that, but like, you're extracting, and it's basically piracy, right? It's just theft on the high seas. Oh, you've got that shiny thing. Oh, I'm going to profit from it, right? And we're just so okay with it because it's what all of us have grown up with no other way of, this is how you do business. Like, people are like, but that's just business. And it's like, but it doesn't have to be, you know, just because it is what our normal has been, because that's the time that we're in. It wasn't actually when things were expensive. And okay, we didn't, you know, there's industrial waste zones from hundreds of years ago as well, but the volumes were different, the number of people were different. So the real question is, can I do this forever? Yes or no? And anything that the answer to that is no, with any product that you sell, if there's no way you could take it back and be responsible for it forever, is there anything you could change to make that yes? Okay, great. If no, all right, what do you need to do differently with the product or the system? It's actually not really complicated. It's actually really simple, and people are really scared of it being simple because then they've got to do something about it. They really like it to be complicated. They really like to say we can't administer it. So if we literally had tax by weight of everything coming in a sheen bag, whether it was electronic, had a battery, was a shoe, was a t-shirt, don't try and differentiate. That's really different from working with people, importing containers full, wholesaling, having accountability onshore, and somewhere onshore we can be accountable with people that are retailing here, whether that be online or bricks and mortar. But a system to just catch, and it could be absolutely a much higher rate pro rata compared with the businesses based here and selling here, but extended producer responsibility for it to work is going to need to be really simple and really catch-all. And people in logistics have actually got the best ideas about this because they know how it works, right? We go, oh, well, we can't do a customs code for this or a customs code for that. We're already dead in the water when it's that complicated because we're talking about items that are so cheap. You think about why, if you've got something that's really cheap and you want to send it back, they'll just say, oh, don't worry, we'll just give you a voucher for a new thing because it's not worth sending it back, even if it's unworn. You know, people. So I think it's just a mindset that if business involves this stuff that we as ratepayers have to pay our council rates to deal with, well, we're all paying for it somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's not a level playing field, and if businesses onshore have to pay and businesses selling direct from offshore don't have to pay, you're going to end up with a constant tension in the system when they're already carrying way more overheads. You know, even if somebody's importing garments here, they're paying warehouse people here, they're paying insurance here, they're paying, you know, thousands of people maybe here if they're a really big company. And so and so we'll get there. And I can also see why it's voluntary at the moment. And the more that we can get people on board to participate so we can build something really practicable, then to switch that to mandatory becomes a lot easier than immediately mandatory and sort of stuck in all sorts of legal straitjackets. But maybe it will be mandatory by X helps get people go, well, let's shape this.
Thank you.
It probably needs to be across the board, not just fashion. We just need to do it for everything.
Thanks, Meriel. That's fascinating. I was just reading no. Yeah, I'm just reading the chat box, and it's like, you know, people are coming up with radical ideas such as like everyone should have carbon budget. Thanks, Usha. Now, Nazmul, just like, you know, we are almost at the tail end of the event. Like in terms of that, like, you know, you in your conversation earlier, you said that fascinating fact about like the systems boundary. Do you think like things like a mandatory EPR scheme would be able to propel that system boundary even further?
Well, that could be one measures, but I would like to give an example. For example, we all know, or what I'm seeing on the chat box also, but I'm not seeing the chat box now. Earlier, I have seen that someone is saying that for t-shirt, they approximately require 3,000 liters of water. But at the same time, do we know that for my life cycle stages or for my wearing of t-shirt, how much water I'm consuming for washing? Do we know those statistics? I don't think so, because
Yeah, we do.
Okay. So
somewhere will be able to find it.
Yeah, my point is that well, definitely there should be the mandatory regulations. This is for the producer perspective, but at the same time, we need to do some awareness program as well as also awareness campaign in relation to the consumer behavior, because demand management should not focus only on the producer perspective. It needs to also focus on the user perspective.
Yes, that's fascinating. Now, I was just quickly looking at if we have missed anything. People are saying that like secondhand market is on the growth, and yeah, there's a really interesting comment that secondhand is growing, but buying firsthand is growing even more. That's a worry. I think that's kind of apt in terms of like what's happening. But I think I'll summarize and reflect a little bit on what we have discussed in terms of like Australia's textile circularity, there is like a lot of things. Like currently we are in that scenario of like global trade war. What's happening, we don't know. And there will be a federal election soon as well in Australia. So there are lots of things that are being under a little bit of a halt in terms of going forward. But some of the things that like we have talked about, like the overproduction, the system efficiency versus sufficiency, and also like, translating how the like science-based data such as LCA can be interpreted into providing much more nuanced approach in design, manufacturing, use phase, and end of life phase should probably be governing how we go forward. We already have like, in terms of one of the very first in the world, we have a national sort of way of going to an EPR scheme, currently voluntary, but we would hope that at some point, because regulation drives innovation and like that sufficiency that we talked about, probably that is one thing that we are going to be looking forward in terms of the next decade. And all of our panelists actually talked about that, like that would be some of the bigger questions that we have to answer. And on that note, I would like to invite all of you to the next session, that our textile session, which is next month. Please look at cernapac.org for the details, and you can register. And I would like to convey my heartfelt gratitude for the three presenters that we have, Timo, Meriel, and Nazmul. Thank you so much for your insights, and I had really, really good time discussing these like very broad questions. And for all the people who have tuned in today, thank you so much. And I hope you have the lovely Anzac and rest of the evening. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much.